Fantastic. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Guillaume Levrier. I'm a political scientist from University Sciences Po in Paris, and I'm working on the policy and institutional issues raised by genome editing. In other words, I'm trying to look how different societies that use different mechanisms to allocate power, wealth, opportunities will have to cope with a capacity to precisely intervene on the genome of different organisms. Now, some part of this study is quite straightforward. I can just interview the politicians that are interested in those questions, interview the scientists and the stakeholders that they consult, and have a pretty good idea of how they will translate technical issues into policy issues they can deal with. However, doing that, the picture wouldn't be complete. There's a wider debate on that. And as you know, the CRISPR germline editing debate is social media native. By that I mean that in 2015, since we've been doing this CRISPR germline editing, Twitter and Facebook, for example, had been around for a long time as a means for individuals to share their opinions, to debate their arguments, and to push for their platforms. So what we're going to have a look today is how germline editing has been debated on Twitter after the news of the birth of Lulu and Nana in China. So before speaking further, I want to emphasize that this is still a work in progress and that the conclusion it yields might be different from what you get today. So in order to have an idea of what kind of opinions, of reactions people would have to the news of the birth of the CRISPR babies, the CRISPR twins, I collected through the Twitter API tweets mentioning a series of keywords such as CRISPR, CRISPR babies, He, etc. over 6 months, and this query yielded 1 million tweets, a bit less than 1 million tweets. So this is what it looks like. I won't go into detail. Every circle is a tweet. Right there, I have only the first 3 days from the 26th to the 29th of November. Basically, here what I want to say, because I can't take the time to describe everything precisely, is that the metadata you get from the Twitter API is not enough to get which tweets are giving an actual qualification or an actual opinion of what's going on. Not the replies, not the amount of retweets, not the amount of followers. This doesn't help you. And if you do it by hand, well, you'll see that much less than 1% of the tweets actually give an opinion of what's going on. And you can't do it by hand because there's 1 million of those tweets. So how do you classify such a big amount of tweets in order to have those who give an actual opinion? When one of the options is using machine learning, the algorithms prepared by Explosion AI, namely Prodigy and Spacey, that let you train a model. And by that, you can include some of the tweets taking a subset of this huge data set, including those of the tweets that give an actual opinion and excluding those who don't. So basically, what we're looking for here is some kind of qualification of the events that happened in China and see what they say. So this is an example. This is an example of 4 of the 13 categories I'm working on right now. So some would say this is about bioethics in China. This is about one scientist that has been reckless. This is about technical issues. This is about something else. So this is just examples. You can't really read the tweets there, but yeah, basically it doesn't really matter. What you really need to understand is that we're not quite interested in the content of the tweets themselves, but we're interested in the patterns of debate in which such arguments will occur. Is it just a reaction to the news? I've seen this article, I'm sharing the article and giving an adjective or a sentence. Or is it in a broader debate, a thread, and can we situate patterns of threads on Twitter? So this is an example of threads. It's not part of the aforementioned data set. It's much more recent. It's a reaction to the web page that has been published by the National Academy of Science on germline editing. If you're following, well, you can't really read either, but basically there are 3 arguments here. One is the PGD plus argument. Germline editing is just PGD, but you're adding an editing step to create viable embryos that don't have the pathogenic trait. The future person argument, is it the person to be born, la personne potentielle in French, and do we have to take account for the welfare of this future person that might be either an embryo or maybe 2 gametes and a compound of a nuclease and a guide. And the third debate is who should allocate this capacity? Is it for the state to reduce inequality, or is it for anyone that can afford it? So that's the big question. So as a temporary conclusion, I would say that what we see right now for this debate on Twitter is that most of the arguments are not really linked to germline editing itself. They're more linked to, like, the technical debates are really linked to what happened with IVF. The eugenics debates is really similar to the debates we had 30 years ago with PGD. And the debate that we're not having is how do we have the technology of government, how do we have the institutional design to create a system that can earn the trust of the individuals to have a good management of this ever-evolving power yielded by nucleases. Thank you for attention.
Thank you. All right, so let's talk about Twitter for a second, because people love Twitter. People love to talk about how Twitter, especially as an example of social media, just drives polarization. But I'm curious, Guillaume, in your analysis, at least your preliminary analysis, are you seeing is the stereotype of it's just a polarized conversation holding true, or is there something else going on in there?
So it depends on the ripples, actually. It's true that you have numerous examples, especially when the news just goes off and then it's one shot, sharing articles, for example, BBC articles saying this is atrocious, or this is the future, or just like a very short sentence or just an adjective. But as I tried to show in my last slide as well, there are threads of actual discussion about what this is about. And what are we talking about? Is it PGD? Is it China? Is it something else? Is it a conspiracy theory? Is it some, yeah. So it's true that probably in absolute value, in a quantitative way, most of the reactions might be, like you said, very polar, very extreme. But you also have examples of actual debates and actual arguments being given on each side. And what struck me in this analysis is that the arguments are not really specific to germline editing. You can find the same arguments 40 years ago with IVF, and you can find the same arguments about PGD as well. Should we do it? Should we screen the babies? Is it eugenics? And so, yeah, today what strikes me most about the debate on Twitter is that it's not specifically on germline editing.
Is it tribal?
I'm not sure. Well, what does tribal mean in this specific context, you know? On Twitter, we don't really have the data on this. We would need to have precise data on who owns the accounts, where do they live, do we have ways to check the actual factual data behind that? We don't. So I can't say whether it's really tribal or not.
So a lot of these conversations, or your presentations in this conversation, have kind of swirled around two themes, and I'm just going to jam